Unsettling whispers of the mind. True accounts of ordinary people driven to unthinkable acts might sound like the title of a sensational thriller, but in reality, it hints at the fragile boundaries separating daily life from sudden plunges into darkness. We often believe we can read the warning signs of criminal minds, some telltale glare, an offhand cruelty. Yet the most disturbing stories involve seemingly normal individuals who, without obvious lead-up, spiral into horrifying deeds. Their neighbors describe them as polite. Their co-workers recall only mild quirks, and nobody expects such a person to snap. Then, amid that everyday calm, something breaks. The very idea that a random teacher, office clerk, or loving parent can be pushed by hidden pressures or half-heard internal voices to commit the unthinkable rattles us deeply, reminding us how precarious our sanity can be. The following exploration delves into chilling, real-life anecdotes of such transformations. Plain folks, once benign, who became instruments of horror under the weight of unrelenting internal whispers. One unsettling case revolves around a man named Daniel, a kind and unassuming neighbor who'd lived in a suburban community for years without incident. By most accounts, Daniel was polite, even helpful, he'd mow an elderly neighbor's lawn, deliver groceries to the disabled, and regularly chat with local kids. Nobody suspected his silent battle with intrusive thoughts. According to a friend, Daniel had confided about a persistent whisper in his head that urged him to purify the neighborhood, though he laughed it off as a random oddity. Over months, that whisper became a chorus, telling him the neighbors had conspired against him, that he must rectify their imbalance. One summer evening, Daniel calmly set out with a homemade incendiary device in his trunk. He targeted a random home, tossed his device through the window, and watched it burst into flame. The residents, asleep, narrowly escaped. When apprehended, Daniel mumbled about how the voice had grown unbearable. Reports say that even after medication, he'd ask, "But wasn't I supposed to do it?" As though the voice still lingered in the corners of his mind. Everyone in the community reeled. This unassuming man had nearly destroyed a family because of an internal narrative no one suspected. Another harrowing episode concerns a homemaker named Eliza who lived in a quiet coastal town. She was known for homemade pastries and a tidy porch, greeting passers-by with a warm smile. Out of nowhere, Eliza stabbed her best friend during a luncheon, leaving the entire town paralyzed with confusion. At trial, Eliza sobbed about hearing her friend's hidden thoughts, certain that the friend planned to kill her first. She insisted she could sense her friend's hatred through the way cutlery scraped the plate. Psychiatrists diagnosed her with paranoid delusions that had escalated over months, though nobody had witnessed the slightest hint of her unraveling. Her children, grown and living elsewhere, expressed guilt about missing the red flags. What made it chilling was that Eliza's illusions were so seamlessly tucked beneath her outward cheer that even her victim had no clue of the looming danger until it was too late. Then there was Mara, a high-achieving college student admired for her discipline and generosity. Underneath the studious veneer, she carried an overwhelming dread of being infected by invisible forces. At first, these obsessions confined themselves to rigorous hand-washing rituals or refusing to shake hands. But pressure mounted as final exams approached, causing intense insomnia. She began to interpret every shadow on campus as a demon aiming to invade her thoughts. Over time, she sank deeper into reclusiveness, convinced that certain classmates were hosts of evil. The turning point arrived one dawn when a campus security guard found Mara in the library with a battered classmate unconscious at her feet. She claimed she was exorcising the darkness, that her fists pummeled the evil out. Later accounts paint a picture of a young woman so haunted by the illusions of contamination that she transformed from conscientious scholar to violent aggressor in a haze of delusion. Her tears in the aftermath showed her half-awareness that she had crossed an unforgivable line, and that the assault served no real solution to her internal turmoil. What ties these narratives together is the idea that none of these perpetrators initially displayed the classic menacing persona. They were everyday people, grappling with quiet storms in their minds. Often, their families, friends, and co-workers saw only mild quirks, small hints they chalked up to stress or eccentricity. A neighbor might recall Daniel's thousand-yard stare, but dismiss it as fatigue. Or a professor might note Mara's trembling hands, but attribute it to exam nerves. In many cases, the pivotal moment occurred when an internal, insidious voice or delusion demanded an action that no rational mind could condone. The unstoppable urge to obey that voice overshadowed any empathy they once possessed, leading to tragedies that shocked entire communities. The revelations that these were not stereotypical criminals but average citizens blindsides us, forcing the question, could such a mental break happen to nearly anyone under extreme pressure? Of course, professional psychologists warn that these episodes typically involve underlying mental health conditions, untreated schizophrenia, severe delusional disorders, or extreme paranoia. But their cautionary tales also illustrate how external stressors, job loss, isolation, trauma, can push those vulnerabilities to the surface. The unsettling whispers these people hear might arise from neurological misfirings or from an irreparable fracturing of their coping mechanisms. In a sense, these are not stories of unstoppable evil, but of tragic, untreated mental decline. Yet understanding doesn't diminish the terror. For the victims, faced with a sudden act of horror from someone they trusted, the betrayal is immeasurable. The havoc wrought on families and neighborhoods can linger for decades, overshadowing once peaceful memories. One particularly chilling case from a small village in the mountains involved a teacher, Ms. Cadio, celebrated for her kindness to children. Over time, Ms. Cadio complained of hearing echoing voices around the school at night, claiming the building was haunted. Her colleagues teased her gently, suggesting stress or exhaustion. But as she told them, the voices say the children are in danger. They want me to save them. No one grasped how far her delusions might extend. Late one winter afternoon, Ms. Cadio barricaded herself and a group of students in a classroom, brandishing a kitchen knife. She insisted she was fending off demons that only she perceived. The standoff ended peacefully when the local pastor convinced her to lay down the weapon. No one was physically harmed, but the fear etched into those children remains a generational memory. Ms. Cadio was eventually taken to a psychiatric facility, evidently tormented by illusions that twisted her protective instincts into a near catastrophe. The emotional scars on that village's psyche endure, anchored by the question of how a beloved teacher could so abruptly threaten those she sought to defend. Similar stories pepper the news occasionally, brief footnotes or sensational headlines. We read of a mother who, convinced aliens had replaced her family, attempts lethal acts in desperation, or a son who murders a parent to stop the infiltration. Each tale underscores that these horrifying acts sprung not from inherent malice, but from illusions or relentless mental torment. The real terror is that we rarely see it coming. The quiet spiral can remain hidden behind daily routines until that culminating moment when the voice inside demands an irreversible step. One might wonder, then, if there is any moral or caution in these accounts. Mental health advocates argue for vigilance, encouraging communities to pay attention to subtle shifts in behavior, extreme isolation, abrupt paranoia, frantic talk of conspiracies. They warn that ignoring a friend's strange remarks or unusual fixations might let a crisis bloom. Each instance suggests that tragedy might have been averted had the person found help sooner, through therapy or medication. Yet the complexities of stigma, denial, or simply not wanting to intrude into someone's personal matters often keep these concerns unspoken. By the time red flags are obvious, the internal pressure might be explosive. And so the phrase "unsettling whispers of the mind" becomes more than poetic imagery. It captures the hush of psychological torment, the quiet meltdown that can sow seeds of violence in normal hearts. It begs the question, how well do we truly know those around us? Our neighbors, friends, or even we ourselves harboring secret storms, teetering on the brink of actions we'd otherwise never condone? That speculation strikes at our sense of safety, fueling the primal fear that horror can emerge in plain sight from a seemingly kind face. Yet there's also a thread of empathy here. These acts often result from untreated illness or unstoppable mania, not premeditated evil. The blame lies partly in missed signs, social failures, a lack of understanding. The tragedy is not just the act, but the entire breakdown that led there. In local circles where these stories originated, people recall the aftermath, the sorrow, the guilt, the attempts at healing. Candlelight vigils or memorials for victims, but also for the perpetrators who were victims of their minds in another sense. A paradox emerges. Can we condemn them fully, or must we pity them as well? That moral quandary lingers. Some believe only condemnation fits the horror inflicted, others see them as lost souls deserving of compassion. The tension remains unresolved. When retelling these accounts, it's crucial not to reduce them to mere shock value. They are tales of fractured psyches overshadowed by illusions, culminating in heartbreak. The real lesson might be that the boundary between stable and unstable can be thinner than we admit. In the swirl of daily life, bills, family, deadlines, dark or paranoid thoughts might germinate if left unchecked, silently eroding our grasp on reality. Many people have fleeting odd thoughts but dismiss them. In these tragic narratives, those fleeting odd thoughts found fertile ground, amplifying to deafening crescendos that demanded horrifying acts. That is the essence of the nightmare. Normalcy turned inside out by relentless internal voices. So, unsettling whispers of the mind, true accounts of ordinary people driven to unthinkable acts, resonates not only as a frightening anthology of tragedies, but as a mirror for humanity's fragile mental balance. Each case is a haunting reminder that monsters aren't always shadowy figures from afar. Sometimes, they're the person next door, undone by whispering illusions that we never suspected. The line separating us from them might be thinner than comfort allows. And in that recognition lies both fear and empathy, a dual sense that we must remain vigilant, watchful for subtle signs of unraveling in ourselves and our loved ones, and also merciful, acknowledging that some horrors stem from unheeded cries for help rather than pure malice. In the end, the stories remain. The mother who hallucinated conspiracies, the neighbor whose unstoppable voice burned a house, the teacher who barricaded children, the student who attacked a friend. Each left a swirl of sorrow in their wake, replaced eventually by silence and reflection. The biggest chilling note is that such an act might be conjured by any ordinary mind turned inward too far, losing its tether to shared reality. That knowledge can be deeply disquieting, yet it carries the seed of caution. If we see the signs, if we hear someone's quiet pleas or read into their haunted gaze, we might help them. Or we might all become spectators in a horror that no one expected until it was too late.